Okay, before we begin, let me just clarify, because of the room change, that this is the room for the social protection. Anyone interested in the energy and environment session, that's upstairs in the law seminar room. We will now begin one of the two parallel sessions on the Asian impact on social protection in the age of globalization. The chair today is Professor Allan Brinkley, who's the Provost and the Allan Nevins Professor of History at Columbia University. Our speakers are Mukul for the professor here at the Kuan School of Public Policy, Mary Jo Bane, the academic dean at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and visit Tantisunthorn, the Secretary General of the Government Pension Fund of Thailand.
I'm Allan Brinkley, as you've just heard, and I'm delighted to be here and very happy to be representing Columbia University. And our session today is about one of the most important issues facing countries all over the world. The title of this panel, as you've just heard, is The Asian Impact on Social Protection in the Age of Globalization. And two of our three speakers will address quite directly issues of social protection in Asia. One of our speakers will be speaking more about the United States, but of course this is a global and thus comparative exercise. And so we're very fortunate to have these three speakers here. Social protection, as we all know, is now a global issue. And those nations capable of constructing policies of social protection face many common challenges. Competing in a global economy, an economy that creates both wealth and inequality. Competing also means how can nations simultaneously move ahead in a global economy and support citizens who are left behind by globalization. Another question that arises out of this topic is how can nations sustain the low-tax, high-investment economic strategies that governments in many developed nations, especially the United States, now embrace while maintaining costly Social Security and other programs. And then finally, how will nations confront problems that are facing all areas of the world today, aging populations, massive migration, and the pressures, of course, that they create on social policy. And then finally, how do rapidly developing nations, particularly China and India, respond to the pressure for social policies that they will undoubtedly soon receive, if they aren't already, but will receive this pressure before reaching a point when the number of people in need is fiscally sustainable. These are all issues that are under the umbrella of social protection. We're fortunate to have here panelists who are able to address both Asian and Western issues of social policy. Mukul, professor here at the Lee Kuan Yew School, who works on Social Security, pension reform in Asia, public finances in developing countries, and Indian external relations. And his presentation is on the impact of aging on pension reforms in Asia. I'm going to introduce all three speakers now, and then they'll each come up in turn and speak briefly for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open the discussion up to the audience. The second speaker will be Mary Jo Bane, the Thornton Bradshaw Professor of Public Policy and Management at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, where she is also the academic dean and the chair of the Management and Leadership Program. She works on race, poverty, and welfare, and also on the role of the Catholic Church in civic life in America. And she's going to be talking about ways in which the ways in which governments design social protection programs and the values that different designs reward and incentivize. And the last speaker will be Visit Tantisunthorn, the Secretary General of the Government Pension Fund of Thailand. Previously, he was the Regional Director of the AIG Investment Group. He was the President and CEO of Grammy Entertainment, and he was the Senior Vice President of American International Assurance Corporation. And he's going to be talking about social protection in Thailand. So thank you all for coming, and Professor Ashel will come up first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk about aging in Asia and its implications. We heard this morning that globalization has made building of strong social safety nets even more essential than before, particularly if the current phase or form of globalization is to be sustained. We also got the impression from the morning session that ideological debates are having less of an importance now, and the technocratic, the sheer complexity of managing our issues is taking priority over the luxury of ideological debates. This is also true with respect to the welfare state, that the managing the welfare states and constructing the social safety nets in Asian countries is going to be far more important than trying to score debating points about whether welfare states should be are success or not, or whether the problems in some countries are due to their extensive welfare states. I should note that among the top 5 countries which are internationally competitive ranked, there are several which have very extensive welfare states. Since we are going to talk about Asia, it may be useful to begin with the proposition that in the future, or increasingly, it is Asia which is going to experience the most rapid aging, both in terms of the pace of aging, which gives less time for adjustment, as well as in terms of the numbers. Let me just give you the data is on this table, but if you look at China and India as the 2 countries, they will have nearly 750 million people between them who will be classified as aged by the year 2050. And that is more than the number of aged in the world in 2006. So that gives some idea of the dimensions of the scale, the challenge that Asia is going to face. If we add Indonesia and some of the other large population countries, then it is clear that increasingly how Asia manages the challenge of aging will have a major impact on how the world manages the aging. When we talk about aging, the counterpart of that aging is what is happening to the economically active population. And this particular graph provides between 1950 and 2050 about the percentage of the population that is between 15 and 59 years of age. Here we can see some rationale for what Andrew was talking about, the demography, that in the 1950s and 60s, it was Japan that had much higher percentage of the population that was young, but Japan began to experience aging first, and its ratio is going to continue to come down. And this is followed by Korea and China, and then eventually India is also going to face that problem. China will face that by 2015 or so. India around 2040 or so. So what that tells us is that while we are going to see a similar kind of demographic aging pattern, the working age population will be, share of working age population will begin to decline. The timing is going to be different. And that difference in timing, it both provides a threat and an opportunity. In terms of opportunity, what it does is to permit us to take advantage of the demographic complementarities that this graph represents, where some are aging faster, others are aging slower, and both India and China have large populations. So even if their share go down, the absolute number of young is going to be still relatively large. So the aging countries can, through technology, through other means, try to take advantage of that demographic complementarities. We had seen that with respect to the manufacturing long time ago. We are beginning to see that with services, and we'll see that in other areas, R&D, knowledge-intensive research, and so on as well. But what is the challenge in here? And the challenge is that while these demographics do provide some room and do provide complementarity opportunities, it also means that large number of jobs will have to be created. So the counterpart of dealing with the aging is labor market reforms. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit, there will be 316 million jobs that a developing Asia will have to create between 2005 and 2020, and that's 2/3 of the world's jobs. So Asia will have to keep on growing to provide jobs, and the fear that many governments have about unemployment and about making sure that enough jobs are being provided is certainly not misplaced. China will have to provide 65 million, but India's challenge is even more, and that is 142 million jobs between 2005 and 20 will have to come in India. And if these countries are not able to provide those jobs in sufficient numbers or of sufficient quality, then some of the construction of social safety nets, the resources that are needed to manage their development challenges, and indeed their social cohesion could come under increasing pressure. To give some comparative idea, in US, during that period, only 12.5 million, and EU 25, only 8.4 million jobs will have to be created. So the converse of this is the challenge that we have with respect to creating jobs. When we talk about the aging, one of the issues that always comes up is what is the adequacy or adequate retirement financing? Now, this issue is becoming quite complicated, not only because of the larger proportion of aged, but each person is living much longer. And there is much greater uncertainty today about the longevity than there used to be. With longevity, the healthcare costs increase quite sharply. So increasingly, while the world is not prepared in terms of the organizational structures, both domestically and internationally, to integrate the pension financing with health financing, increasingly the need is going to be to integrate the two. And when I talk about challenges, that is indeed going to be one of the major challenges that the world will face. This particular this particular chart provides what is the replacement rate that one needs to get, which roughly is the income you get in retirement as a proportion of the pre-retirement income, which is adjusted for the inflation risk and for the longevity risk, plus some survivors' benefits and the disability benefits that are built into it. Now you can see that even for the OECD, the ratio ranges very widely. But what we are seeing over time is that in many of the countries that have taken reform measures, such as Canada, Denmark, Australia, US, UK, that replacement rate has been increasingly coming down. And that implies that from the public systems, we are going to see lower replacement rate, but that replacement rate will have to be made up then from other sources. The replacement rate that experts usually recommend is between 2/3 and 3/4 of the pre-retirement income, which is also adjusted for all the risks that I mentioned. Now, it is in that context that the idea that the World Bank had put forward in 2005 about the multi-tier system, which ranges from 0 tier, which is universal, or it can be residual, but it is financed from the budget. So you have social risk pooling, and the first tier, which is the usual social security systems of in many countries with social insurance. The second tier, which is a mandated occupational or personal pension plans, which can be defined benefit or defined contribution. Increasingly, they are defined contributions where the risk is borne by the individual. And then you have got the voluntary occupational or pension plans. And finally, voluntary personal savings, the family, working longer number of years, and so on. All of those, the mix together will need to provide 66 to 75% of the replacement rate, and for a much longer period because the life expectancy is greater. Each country in Asia is starting from a very different starting point. So this is a framework for thinking about how do you fill in these aspects rather than a blueprint, as some people had misunderstood the World Bank as saying. World Bank is not saying that. It is just a framework for thinking, and it is the ingenuity and innovations of each country's policymakers as to how they fill in. And I like to call the word tier rather than pillar, because tier implies you can do it with different width at different times and so on, while pillar implies more of a uniformity. Now, with this, what are going to be the major challenges? And these are related to Asia. As I work on many, many countries in Asia, I found that professionalism of the provident and pension fund institutions, both in the public sector and in the private sector, is extremely weak. So there are core functions. You have to collect contributions, pay benefit in time, have a good management information systems, have good investment policies, others. All those are part of the core professionalism that is needed, and there is a long way to go and a wide variance in the professionalism with which some of these these provident and pension funds are being managed. The second is that there is increasingly there is a need for a system-wide perspective to see different tiers in one as a integrated whole to get the replacement rate, because from the one scheme it is impossible to provide a sustainable adequate replacement rate. But what has happened in Asia is that many systems have developed as silos. Civil servants usually get the best pensions, so do the army, but they are a relatively small proportion of the total labor force, yet consume disproportionately large number of GDP devoted for pensions. And there is the one category of the pension system doesn't talk to the other category. So now there is a system-wide perspective which can only come about through better regulation and governance. So if we were to ask how many regulatory agencies there are in Asia that look at a system-wide perspective on pension reform, there are hardly any. And that is a huge challenge in regulation and in governance to get the system-wide perspective along with the professionalism. The third area is the coverage. In most countries, formal sector where the employer-employee relationship exists is very low. And you have got large informal sector which are not that easy to cover, but which are essential to cover. So one area I have been working on recently is on micropensions. And one of our challenges in that was to convince the poor that they indeed have a future. Because to have a retired phase in your life is itself a novel idea in the history of mankind. And for many poor, that is not an idea that they have had. So to give that and give them confidence that whatever they do today for their retirement, there will be confidence and integrity in the system, that's not very easy. And instilling that, however, will have to be a high priority, along with good risk pooling, social risk pooling through budgetary resources. So the fiscal reform is needed as well. Investment policies and performance, I think Kun Visit will talk a lot more about that, but I'll certainly say that the financial and capital markets are limited, and as our pension assets continue to grow, we need to have much more sophisticated investment policies and the performance of many countries in terms of getting the real rate of return on a sustainable market basis needs to be improved quite significantly. Important is in terms of the payout phase of the pension in terms of annuities. Most countries don't have long-term investments. Bond markets are weak, so that the insurance companies don't have enough assets to provide those annuities. And the payout phase, which has not received much attention, needs to really receive a lot more than what has been the case. Recently, there was an article in Financial Times which in the UK context had a headline, Financial Education or Disaster. The more we go towards DC, the more the individuals has to provide the remaining replacement rate not provided through the public systems, the more financial education is necessary. But even in countries like UK, US, and so on, the financial education remains a very, very weak link, much more so in Asia, and we haven't begun to scratch that. Finally, the point I made earlier, integrating pension and health financing. My final comment, therefore, is that when one thinks of aging and the challenges that Asia faces with respect to aging and pensions, one should not be thinking of it in very narrow terms, because there are vast areas or large areas of public policies in different sectors that need to be integrated. But as someone mentioned, I think Andrew, you mentioned this morning, the research and the expertise in this area in Asia remains extremely weak. So I hope that the Asian policymakers begin to pay more attention to more empirically robust research and integrate them into policy making. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to exchange ideas and learning with people from so many different places. I will focus my remarks on what I'm calling design dilemmas in social protection and safety net programs. This obviously assumes that countries, including developing countries and including developing countries in Asia, will be struggling with the dilemmas of designing social protection programs and safety net programs. They will be doing this because these programs will be demanded for both political reasons and economic reasons, and so struggling with these design dilemmas is what we will need to do. Let me see if I've got this right here. Very good. Design dilemmas arise, as I say, because countries are struggling with the issues of how to develop safety nets and social protection programs. What I propose is that design dilemmas arise because important values that societies care about may come into conflict with each other as you are designing your social protection programs. And I want to focus on a couple of those. The ones I have listed on the slide, as you can see, are our work effort, making sure that the social protection and safety net programs that are designed continue to encourage work and so on. Thrift and savings, family care and responsibility, protection against insecurity and destitution, and of course, good stewardship of scarce public resources. I think it is not the case that countries will say we cannot afford social protection and safety net programs, because they will be developing such programs, as I say, for both political and economic reasons. But how they design them, how they are operated, will depend a lot on public resources. Now, these dilemmas may be especially pointed, and I think this is one of the reasons that it is so interesting to talk about this in this context, because some societies place more emphasis than other societies do on certain values. And I want to direct your attention, obviously, to the values of work, of thrift and savings, and of family care and responsibility, which all societies are concerned with, but I think some are especially concerned. My contention is going to be that these dilemmas can often be resolved or reconciled through careful program design, and that we actually have a couple of alternative program designs operating in various places in the world. What I want to do is basically use two examples, assuming I don't run out of time before I get through my two examples. But the first example I want to use is the example of safety nets and work efforts, the question of how one designs safety net programs that also encourage work effort. I want to focus on these safety net programs because I think they are recognized across the world as important tools for alleviating destitution and mitigating the effects of insecurity. And I think it is increasingly being recognized that safety net programs can be complementary to development strategies, that when a population is protected, at least to some extent, against income insecurity, that they are more willing to take risks, they are more willing to make investments, they avoid some of the dire consequences of insecurity when families disinvest, when they take their kids out of school, and so on. Now, safety net designs, especially in situations of scarce resources, typically involve means targeting, i.e., designing programs which attempt to deliver benefits only to those families and individuals who can provide for themselves. As I say, especially when you are in a situation of scarce resources, as to some extent all of us are, have to be especially careful in targeting and design. And so the design question that in many ways the U.S. has been obsessed with over the years as we have worked with our welfare programs is the question of how to design safety net programs that encourage work, that do not act against the development strategy of encouraging work. So there are a couple of different ways of constructing safety net programs that both target the most needy and encourage work effort. And the first set of those design alternatives I've categorized as work incentives. And one way to do that is to construct safety net programs which include a benefit reduction rate. That is, a benefit floor is set for those who have no income. Benefit goes down as income rises, but not one for one. So, for example, in the American Food Stamp Program, the benefit level is set at about 1/3 of the American poverty level, but benefits go down by 30% as income increases. So your income goes up $1, your food stamp benefits go down 30%. Those of you who are good with numbers will realize that this particular scheme reaches a break-even point at the poverty line, which is not a mistake. But that's one way of designing a safety net program to encourage work. And the idea is because you get to keep more of your income, your benefits don't go down one for one. That encourages work. Another approach that Americans have taken is that of earnings supplement. And these earning supplements are especially designed to address the problem of the working poor, of those workers who, especially in a globalized economy, are not earning enough to be able to support their families. And in those programs, and the example is the American Earned Income Tax Program, Earned Incomes Tax Credit Program, benefits increase with earnings up to a certain level and then start going down. So with this program, the more you earn, the more your income goes up, and the benefits amount to about 40% increase over your wages. As I say, this is an approach to dealing with the working poor, which has proved to be both very popular and reasonably effective in the United States. Another approach, obviously, is to use work requirements to say that eligibility for benefits depends on looking for work or on working, which is the approach in some American states. There are also, of course, designs which are work for food or work for cash programs. And these programs exist in many countries. The most ambitious, I believe, and a program that has started to fascinate me quite a lot is India's National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, which has the ambition of providing 100 days of guaranteed work at the minimum wage to any rural household which shows up and asks for it. That's obviously an enormous program which will be astonishingly interesting to watch. Benefit reduction rate regimes in the American experience are difficult to understand and implement, and the research suggests that they haven't had a whole heck of a lot of effect on whether people work or not. My own interpretation, having been the administrator of welfare programs both at the state level and at the national level in the United States, is that in the United States context, those programs got so complicated that nobody, including the recipients and including the people who administered the program, understood how they worked. Only the graduates of the Kennedy School who designed them understood how they work. And I have now become a fan of simpler programs for dealing with this. They're important programs, but if they get too complicated, they lose their purposes. As I said before, the American Earned Income Tax Credit Program has proved both popular and effective. It is now the largest means-tested program in the United States, dealing with the problem of the working poor, and has been politically viable as well as effective. Work requirements and work for food or cash programs have proved difficult to implement. They have often been subject to corruption. Work programs, guaranteed work programs, went out of fashion in the United States about 30 years ago because the last time we tried it was not exactly a wild success. But there are examples of such programs that are working well around the world and are obviously an approach that makes sense. The India program, of course, not only has the ambition of providing income to the families who need the work, but also of building infrastructure for the country. And so when you can get that kind of double effect of supporting income at the same time that you are developing infrastructure, that can be quite popular. It's also worth noting, though, that there are some approaches to safety net programs that are not particularly focused on the issue of work effort. Conditional cash transfer programs are being adopted in many countries. The most well-known of these, I believe, is Mexico's Oportunidades program, which has been copied by many countries. These safety net programs tie cash assistance, safety net assistance, to behavior that increases human capital. In the Oportunidades case and the case of most of the countries that have copied it, schooling or preventive health. Families receive their cash benefits on the condition that they send their kids to school and invest in preventive health. There is considerable evidence of the effects, positive effects of these programs on human capital. The second example that I want to talk about, and talk about quite briefly, is the example of designing old age assistance programs that are complementary, that are reconciled with values of family care and responsibility. Many countries recognize the need for safety net programs for the elderly to supplement social insurance or pension systems, especially if those are mostly private. That is a kind of safety net program that fills in the bottom piece of the support system for the elderly. Now, these programs really require design decisions about how to deal with the responsibilities of families for their elderly members, and this is not actually an easy question. Societies differ in the extent to which it is considered desirable for the elderly to live in independent households, and certainly vary in the extent to which the elderly do live in independent households rather than living with their family members. Providing assistance to individual elderly permits and encourages independent living and may diminish assistance to the elderly from other family members. Again, I think that varies from culture to culture. The experience in the United States has surely been that once the Social Security program came into full effect and the elderly could afford to do so, they lived by themselves rather than with their children. And when they were asked if this was a desirable state of affairs, the elderly were actually more likely to say it was a desirable state of affairs even than their children were. But again, that varies from society to society. I merely want to point out how important it is to deal with that. How do you, in fact, deal with this dilemma of reconciling assistance to the elderly with family responsibility? Well, one thing you can do is to try to limit eligibility to those without families. The Chinese system tries to do that, relies on local bodies to decide who is actually needy. One of the things that is considered is whether there are any family members around. Another way you can do it is to define the assistance unit and count income in a variety of ways so that the incentives work in different ways. An assistance unit can be a household, but it need not be. If you think about the assistance unit as a household, then you think about the income of the whole household in deciding whether an elderly person is eligible for assistance. But you don't have to do that. You can say, gee, that provides a real disincentive for elderly to live with their families, and we don't want to do that, so we would like to count it differently. Other approaches, of course, are more direct. Filial responsibility laws that require family members to support their elderly members, which are being tried in some places. And it will be interesting, again, to see how those work themselves out. And, of course, there is the approach of simply trying to promote a culture and expectation of family responsibility. Those are my two examples. There could be lots more. There are obviously more design issues. I think I would close by saying a couple of general comments. Designing effective and appropriate safety net programs really requires dealing with these design dilemmas that are posed by conflicting values. Countries are using different mechanisms for dealing with them, and we can learn from the experience of each other and adopt designs most consistent with the values and circumstances in each country. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the sponsor of inviting me to be here, and I think this is an interesting subject that I'm dealing with every day. The situation in Asia, I think the two speakers in the panels, I think they already brief you what's going on in my session. I like to really raise the real case that I think the Thailand case on the social protection would be something that can be a case of that interesting in Asia that we could look at and see potential and then how to deal with the problem there. But I think the situation here in Asia now, when we talk about the Asian impact on the social protection, we have to think about the way we lived before, and this is the chain of culture in Asia that in the old days we have the extended family that 2 or 3 generations living together in the same house, and with the globalization and the impact on that. So extended family start to be a single family, and then the reduction of fertility rate that create the issue that the each family have the less number of children this day. So with the impact of the globalization, that because of the industrialization and more pressure and competition, the people who live up country start to move to the big city and then try to find a job that will be very competitive, and so they begin to spin off from the family and then try to put up their own family. So the family, if we see the numbers here, there will be smaller and a single family in urban area. With the figures of the UNSCAP in Southeast Asia in 2007, it's 4.5% per family that going to be reduced down to, in the year 2020, would be about 3.5% in the family, which meaning that with this kind of reduction in the number of the children here, so going to be more family coming, and old age society is coming up. With the Thai old age, living alone from in 1970s, about 10% of the Thai people living the old age living alone, and that can be increased to 17% in year 2004. If we see this is the number of the population in the Mahidol University of Thailand. That's comparing fertility rate. And if you see the Thailand in the situation, the average about at the moment in 2006, the Thailand have about 1.5 children per family, and if you see the Singapore on the left-hand side, that would be about 1.3. So this is due to the successful birth control and the family planning that the program that's implemented. So if you see those countries in Indochina, like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, that you see that Timor is 6.4. I think this is something that we need to address later on, and how to do the better family planning there. If you see in this graph, this is a declining of the fertility rate in Thailand. The number I show you, that 1.5 child in the family, that would be in the 2006. And if you see in the 1964, there's about 6.3. This has happened in the old days, even during my grandfather's time, that he has 10 children in a family. And this is not new to the Asian people, that they in the old days in 1940, 1950, each family have about 6, 7, 8 children. And the other problem this is not only in Asia though, but this is in every part of the world, that the increasing expected age longevity. Thailand, 10 years ago, that the number of the life expectancy in Thailand 20 years ago is about 64, 65 years old. But at the moment, it's about 74. The longest life average would be in Japan, which is 82 years. So if you look at the increasing proportion of the Thai old age, which is the definition is over 60 years old, you see that the proportion of the old age people in 2005 would be 10%. And that would be increasing to 15% in year 2020. And with the good family planning, I don't know if it's good or not, but this is the family planning that have effect in the demographic change. So the people under age of 15 years old. In 2005, it's 24%. It's going to be reduced down to 20% in year 2020. This is a very interesting table that I like to address. Thailand has a population of 65 million. And if you split out into the non-labor force and the active labor force, you see that the non-labor force, out of 65, the population age of 15 to 59 would be about 44 million, which is about 2/3 of the population is and we classify that as a working people, 15 to 59. And the non-labor force, that is 26 million. And if you look at the active labor force of 39 million, you see that if we split out into informal sector and formal sector, you see that the people who have in the formal sector have coverage, the large or small coverage, that doesn't matter, but they have the formal sector that have the system in the coverage of the social protection, i.e. the Social Security Fund, the defined benefit plan of the government official, the state enterprise employees, or the private sector that have the formal, that can collect the pension system. That is only 13 million, which is about 2/3 of the active labor force. This is not happen only in Thailand. This has happened everywhere in Asia, especially in the Asian country that have an agricultural country tend to be industrialized. You see that this kind of informal sector that we have to deal with the problem that how we're going to collect and how we're going to provide a system, the social protection or the pension scheme to them. Now, if you look at the agricultural sector in Thailand, it's about 14.5 million. Manufacturing is about 1.8 million. The commerce utility is about 6.4 million. This one, they don't have the system. They don't have protection. They don't have social security that can provide them at least a small benefit to that. So this is how do they live? They have to live on their own saving. So those informal sector, what do they have is that the government provide them the universal health coverage, and you guess this is how much that the government provided to these people. This is 30 baht per person. That would be about less than $1 US a year. That's that universal health system. And that's community-based saving that they have to live on their own and informal mechanisms. Whereby the formal sector of 17 million, they have the Social Security Fund that provide them the minimum benefit, about 9 million people. And that's the MBS, that's a civil servants medical benefit for about 5.7 million. That's including the dependents like the family. Because the good thing about the government officials is that they are provided with all those medical benefit scheme for the whole family. There's government welfare, about 1.2 million, and the GPF, government pension fund, we have about 1.2 million members that we manage the pension fund for them. When we look at the public mechanism of the social protection in Thailand, I like to put that into two groups of people. The working people, the age of 15 to 59 who is working now, what they live with now is that income securities with the Social Security Fund, the government pension fund, pay-as-you-go pension, and the provident fund of the state enterprise. And also they have the health securities, that's including the universal health coverage of 30 baht, civil servants benefit, medical benefit scheme. So that is on the working people. What about the old age, the retired people? Only the government official and the state enterprise in some units, they have the defined benefit plan. that after the retirement they get the replacement rate of 70% of what they have in they're supposed to have in the last year salaries. So the government benefit of the government official that they are taken care of the whole life after they retire. So this is the benefit, and the other have to rely on their own saving, like in the formal sector, in the private sector. When they have the provident fund, they don't have any scheme of the defined benefit plan. So the government did not provide anything to them. They have to live on their own saving. The other public mechanism that they have in the system of the pension scheme, that would be the informal sector. For the informal sector, is a tax deduction of about 300,000 baht, or a bit less than $9,000 per year for the buying retirement mutual fund. That's for their own saving. So the social protection in Thailand for the formal sector, for the formal social security system, this is only for the workforce in the formal sector only. So again, the informal sector has been left with nothing at the moment. And this is something that the government would like to address, that how we're going to come up to get it to be compulsory in the near future. So, however, the Social Security fund system provides the minimum protection. That's very small amount of contribute into the funds. The employee and employer contribute about 5% each, and the government contribute about another 2.75% to the fund. But the maximum that they can have is only the 750 baht contribution, which is very, very small. And old age benefit, that out of the SSS or Social Security system, that at least you have to work until 55 years old. If they have an unemployment and sending at least 180 months of contribution to the fund, they will receive about 20% replacement rate, which is Professor Mukul already mentioned, that the reasonable rate of the replacement for not only for the people in Asia but all over the world, they are talking about 65 to 75% replacement rate. So the system in Thailand now, which is covering the most of the formal sector, they have only 20% replacement rate. So to fill in the gap between 20% and 65 to 75, that have to be on the voluntary saving. So again, what I like to address is that what we have now, if we talk the three pillars or three tiers of the pension system, if in the public sector they have the pension plan for the government officer that's budgeted, and the government pension fund under pillar 3. And for the private sector, they have only the Social Security for the old age and the provident fund, and retirement mutual fund and insurance for the pillar 3 or voluntary. Nothing has been dealt with for the compulsory or the pillar 2. So the future challenge of the system in the social protection in Thailand is that how to build a sustainable institutional framework for social protection, which we call the National Pension Fund, based on the mandatory defined contribution concept. So that would be funded by both employee and employers and designed to be privately managed. This is going to be the long-term solution for the country in Asia and the country in wherever in the world, that we need to have the compulsory. We have to force them to save for their own retirement. And we had the other problem that our challenges in the dealing with this is that expanding the coverage, improving the replacement rate. How are we going to cover 67% of the labor force that is in the informal sector? So that would be something that we design. Actually, the government is working on this. The community-based approach and also the occupational-based approach that from certain occupation they should have enough coverage and then their own pension system. That they need the reform of the current system to be better served, like the Social Security Fund that I mentioned, that only 20% replacement rate. No one can live with 20% replacement rate. No one can live with 20% of their own salaries when they retire. So this is something that we need to address, and the government pay-as-you-go system that provides even 70% of replacement rate. That's why I said that the government official is very lucky that they have their own defined benefit scheme, even though this is unfunded from the national budget, but this is provided to the civil servants. And the other thing is that how to create the saving culture. Like I mentioned, this is a 20% replacement rate. How we're going to build up to 65 to 75% replacement. That have to be voluntary. That have to be safe. Otherwise, they have to be compulsory, like a national pension fund. The globalization of the investment policies is also the challenge that, these days we, like the government pension fund, we're not investing in the domestic country, domestic anymore. We look ourselves as a global fund managers. We look at where is the return, the good return with the acceptable risk. But even though we still have about 85% of our assets investing in Thailand, but the fund managers these days, to have enough social protection, enough pension benefit, they need to diversify. They need to have asset allocation. They cannot just invest in the fixed income anymore. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, a country in Asia, they just focus on how they're going to invest that pension fund. They just invest in the fixed income. Even though the failure of the social security system in Thailand, because they invest about 90% in the fixed income market. And the objective of the running the pension scheme is that you have to beat inflation. You have to how to invest the pension to beat the inflation. Our long-term objective should be some certain percent over the inflation in a long-term basis. Like in the government pension fund, we have about 2.75%. These are policies that 2.75% over the inflation for 12 years. Long-term objective is to invest the money for the pensioner, for the member to have enough return to live with the inflation, cope in the inflation in the long term. So my conclusion is that the system in Asia have to tend toward something that compulsory, that they have to force them to save for the social protection, and the health benefit would be on top of that, like the compulsory and the insurance scheme. So this is something that we are working on in Thailand. Thank you.
I want to thank all three of our speakers for very different but complementary observations about social protection in both Asia and in the West. And we have now about half an hour for questions. And let me just ask first the three speakers whether they have any comments on each other's presentations. No. Well, then why don't we just open this up immediately to the audience. And there are microphones in either aisle, towards the top and the bottom. Please, if anyone has questions. Robert, you want to go to a microphone? Or you're bringing you one.
Hi, I'm Robert Lieberman of Columbia. I wanted to ask about globalization to each of you. It's been one of the sort of fixed points or fixed questions of the globalization debate that it's globalization will have an effect on social protection schemes within countries, on the welfare states of countries. And I wondered how each of you might might think about the problem of globalization. What effect does the increasing integration of national economies have on the design dilemmas that countries themselves face on their internal welfare schemes? What effect is globalization going to have on in Asia, where the challenge is to build up, as the last speaker described, to build up schemes of social protection at the same time that economies are becoming more integrated and the competitive challenge across national borders is becoming more acute. So I wonder if each of you might address that question of the impact of globalization on national social welfare schemes.
Probably the biggest effect that globalization is having on social protection schemes is increasing the need for them. At least that would be how I would see it in the United States. That is because the global economy is much more competitive. There are winners and losers in the United States, and there's just no question about that. And winners and losers in other countries as well, and greater insecurity for workers and for families because of the increased fluidity of the economy. And that, it seems to me, increases the need for social protection schemes and also increases the political demands for social protection schemes. I'm not sure how much effect it actually has on the design of them or on how countries respond to the particular challenges of meeting social protection schemes. Certainly the exchange of information is going to allow countries to learn more from each other and not necessarily replicate all the mistakes that countries have made as they have designed their programs. But I'm not sure I see a kind of convergence in terms of the design issues.
Well, I think the globalization with the social protection, I like to address it in the viewpoint of capital market and the investment to get enough return. This day, if you see the ASEAN countries, like in Thailand or other countries in Asia, you see that because of globalization, then the money flow in and out all the time. And that's something that makes the capital market very volatile. That's if the Thai market and I think Malaysian market and other market here in Asia, they're facing the same issue on the market been going up because of the liquidity flow from the globalization effect from the U.S., from the Europe, and that's something that's very volatile, and then we have to deal with something that we need the long-term and stable, more long-term and more stable in terms of the income protection, social protection in the long term. So this is an issue of that why we need to look out from the country and look into the country again, that how we're going to manage the situation to have the enough protection for the member.
It may be useful to think of globalization not as a homogeneous way that every country is following. For example, we see very different approaches to globalization between China and India. So the way that they are approaching globalization will have an impact on how they construct their social safety nets. The second thing that would need to be considered is the starting point. In many countries, as I mentioned, the starting point is simply not there. And if globalization is going to create huge losers, particularly if the pace of change is very rapid and the kind of jobs that need to be generated, then it is imperative that certain measures be taken which are integrative, not just of the pensions or the healthcare, but also the education, the labor market, the fiscal reform. And that is where there are going to be a lot of challenges that are going to occur. Globalization is also having positive impact in terms of the way the financial and innovations while they are right now creating some problems, one can still use those financial innovations to benefit the people who were previously had too low a saving, which were not able to invest in the markets, can now go through the aggregate or the other routes and can indeed earn a higher rate of return. One of the issues, though, which Asia has not faced yet, is the whole issue of cross-border labor flows that have occurred. And what is the, we know the remittances are one part of it, but, and they are providing a degree of social protection to those when the remittances are sent to the aged parents and so on. But what has not happened is that in many countries, those foreign workers have no protection whatsoever, either by their domestic governments, the source countries, or by the recipient countries. And this is one area where the regional organizations, whether it is the ASEAN or SAARC, or whether it is regional development banks like ADB, they have not done enough to try to address that cross-border issue. Europe is beginning to address to some extent. There are some beginnings of agreements between US Social Security Administration and other countries on a bilateral basis and so on. But I think this is one area that unless we pay more attention to, we are going to find the more challenges ahead.
If I could just make one comment on one of the sort of unanswered and unanswerable questions, it seems to me, about this issue of the variation among social programs is the impact that that might have over time on the ability of nations to compete for skilled workers. Will people use the robustness of social policy in different nations to determine where they wish to work and live? In the United States, there's a lot of variation from state to state in social protections, and there's no evidence at this point that that's had a big impact on where people choose to live. But over time, particularly internationally, I wonder whether this will be a factor in the competitiveness of nations at the same time that competitiveness is working against social policies in lots of countries. Next question. I saw a few hands. Yes.
Hello. I am Dr. Prafulla Misra from LKY School of Public Policy in MPA program. My question is regarding the social safety net. Actually, it addresses the mainly those who are beyond the labor force, from 15 to 59, say the old age or the younger ones or the disabled people. But in India, particularly I belong to India, 12 million people are added to the workforce, labor force, every year. It's a major concern for the policymakers. Now, how the social security security net will cover, whether it covers those who are unemployed, educated unemployed, particularly the recent rural employment guarantee scheme, like that 100 days employment. This is mainly targeting those who are not very literate, they are not literate or uneducated. Those educated youths, they are not going for those avenues, those opportunities, because they are reluctant to work, because these are mainly manual work. So how these public policy makers will address this educated unemployment? It is closely related to social security. Whether your social security measures, safety measures will also include them or not. That's my. Both Professor Mukul and also Professor Mary in the design.
When, what comes out is that when we talk about social security, social safety nets, it is not just one set of policies. If you are getting unemployed people who have gotten through the tertiary educations or even in secondary education, then one needs to ask, does the education system needs to be changed so that there is a greater integration between the jobs and the manpower that is available? As a matter of fact, in many areas in India right now, there is a premium on those who have got the requisite skills that are needed in the job market. There is a mismatch. So while there may be some unemployment, the idea is not to just say, not to continue with the current set of education or labor market or other policies, but to try to think of an integrated way in which you can provide some lifetime income. Now, when you talk about the unemployment insurance in a situation where you have 50 million people in the labor force who are in the so-called organized sector where labor laws apply, and rest of them are not, that is the sheer resources that are needed and the administrative capacity needed is going to be not available and will have much higher opportunity cost elsewhere. So one should not think in narrow terms, here is an unemployment youth, and we take a silo from there and say, what can we do about them? You got to look at the system-wide perspective.
The two big design issues in unemployment insurance schemes are when do you become eligible? Do you have to have worked before you become eligible for unemployment? And how long can you receive benefits? And the design question of how long you can receive benefits really involves kind of balancing the desirability of providing some support to people on a temporary basis when they are out of work, but not for so long that they continue to be out of work longer than would be appropriate, and provides the encouragements to move and so on. A lot of countries provide, well, the United States provides unemployment benefits for 6 months and then a possible 6 months extension, and then after that you go to a kind of much more bare bones scheme of food stamps and very basic support. So, I mean, again, it's the design issue of how you kind of provide that safety net to the right people at the right time, and it seems to me that the economic development requirements would want to encourage those young people to, how do we say it, lower their reservation wage perhaps, or move to other places and get back into the labor market, so that you want to design your unemployment scheme to support that.
Next question.
I wonder if, I'm Pat Levy from the London School of Economics. I wonder if I could ask the panel to say something about size of country and Social Security schemes, because I think the U.S. Social Security Administration, probably the largest in the world at the moment, and in practical terms, in terms of the number of people being served. And if you think about India and China, it doesn't seem feasible for there to be a nationally organized Social Security system or a nationally organized pension system. And if we also think about the issue that Professor Mukul raised of people working across borders, and we think about internal borders in India and China, it's going to be fantastically complex in the next 10 years, I'd have thought, to set up Social Security schemes that had any hope of working. And this is particularly important because, you know, if you look at American or British Social Security systems, and you look at some of the things that Professor Mukul handled under the concept of professionalism, just look at simple things like having an IT system that can cope with it. In our Social Security system, we have 200 different mainframe computers with millions of lines of code that have been written years ago that are incredibly expensive to and the same is true of the Social Security Administration in the US, even more. So it would be really important if you were going to do a large-scale expansion of Social Security systems, how you actually did it, and how you would do it in a way that would provide a very good foundation for the future, and not the kind of, you know, enormous legacy problems, legacy system problems that countries in the West already are coping with, and coping with quite badly, I mean.
In terms of the administration of the system, I guess I'd make the counterproposal that bigger is better. That is, social insurance systems are relatively automatic. I mean, there's not a lot of individual worker discretion. If you're running it correctly, you don't have to kind of walk into the office and have somebody, kind of have a conversation. You just, you're this old, you get this many benefits, and it all works on like a big computer. And so it seems to me that the advantage of a centralized system is that this is a place where there actually are some economies of scale. I mean, you only have to write those 100,000 lines of code once, not 50 times, as you would do in the U.S. if you were doing it on a state system. So it also seems to me that if you do things on a regional basis, I mean, and the variation that Allan talked about in the United States in the social protection system is that some of our basic programs are run on a state-by-state basis rather than nationally. I think that's a terrible idea in the United States, and certainly would not suggest that to other countries. The best programs in the United States are national programs, the food stamp program, Social Security program, and so on. Why is that? Well, because states in the U.S., like states in India or provinces in China, vary enormously in their economic capacity. And in many ways, the whole idea of safety nets or insurance is to help those places that have less capacity. So I don't make this statement about a lot of different kinds of programs, but I think on this one I'd say, go national.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you.
Good.
There are economies of scale, which is true, in administration.
Yeah.
There is room for specialization in investment management and in other areas. At the same time, there could also be diseconomies of scale if your scale is of the India and China size. And particularly if you are starting, you already have legacy problems. China has got its legacy problem. India has got its legacy problem of the civil service scheme. So the new scheme that was developed is a defined contribution scheme instead of a defined benefit scheme, which has got fairly interesting, novel, innovative architecture to reduce transaction costs. And it is going to be phased in over a 35-year period. But that is still going to be only 18 million people. Okay? I mean, it may be 18 million times 4 persons per family, still covering 72 million people. Not small. But if you can imagine that 17 million is going to go to 300 million, then you are talking about a very different scale. And these economies can set in, and the mistakes can be very costly in terms of reversibility. So we have found, I mean, when I was working at one stage for Sri Lankan government, and they had a national scheme, but they had completely fouled up their registration and other systems so that they had 8.9 million accounts for 1.5 million members. And our recommendation was you just go back to the back room and start all over again, scrap the whole system. Now that is 1.9 million. If you got 300 million in India and you foul up that system, even though there are economies of scale, your reversibility is going to be something you need to take into account as well. And the legacy problems are politically very, very difficult to handle in many places. So while you need to figure out in terms of your different tiers where there are economies of scale where you can apply, but you also need to do research on where these economies set in and what could be the cost of reversibility.
I agree with Mary Jo that the economies of scale and the national quality of Social Security in the United States is a key to its success, but of course it rests on certain things that might not be replicable in other countries. For example, it rests on having a reasonably efficient national tax system, because the Social Security system is funded by taxes that every American pays on a portion of his or her income. It also rests on the ability to keep track. It rests on the ability to allow only a relatively small number of people sort of fall through the cracks and not get registered. Every American gets a Social Security number virtually at birth, and that's not an easy thing probably to replicate either, especially in very large countries. But if you have that infrastructure, then the system can work very well and very simply, as it does in the United States. And although the Social Security system is attacked by many conservatives in the United States for all sorts of reasons, I think most Americans do believe correctly that the Social Security system is an enormous success story in the United States. We don't have many, but that's one.
I agree with you that U.S. Social Security is a success story. The transaction costs are very low, but U.S. is still unique in that it is the income tax system that is collecting Social Security taxes. There is a separation of benefits versus the collections. And that a very large proportion of the Social Security beneficiaries are children and women, not the elderly, because of the survivors' benefits and others that they could.
Not a large proportion.
I want to pick up on the theme of state capacity, which seems to run through a lot of this. A couple of things seem to be really critical. One is the size of the informal sector in most Asian economies, and the difficulty of collecting, particularly payroll-related taxes. And Mary Jo talked about the work incentive type programs, which require enormous quantities of data and very strong implementation capacity, which most poor countries don't have. So my question is, given weak state capacity in many poor countries, what does that suggest for program design? Does it suggest, for example, that a universal type zero pillar rather than a means-tested zero pillar works better simply because you may not have the state capacity to do means testing?
Well, let me answer that in the perspective of the informal sector in Thailand and how we're going to deal with that. The collection system. I think what they're trying to do, and I think that's probably the most effective way, is that to work with the revenue department. Well, but the informal sector, some of the informal sector, they don't pay tax anyway. But we have the identification of the revenue department that they give. So the system that they're planning to do is to overlay that into the revenue department system, and then how to collect the contribution on that.
The Opportunity Days program in Mexico is a really interesting example, I think, of a large-scale system that is nationally designed and in many ways certainly nationally regulated, but operates at the local level with quite low-paid women kind of going into the villages and sort of figuring out who should be getting Opportunity Days. And it seems to work, partly because it is designed quite well at the national level. The benefits are determined at the national level, but then they're kind of driven to the local level. So, again, it seems to me that the interesting thing there is the balance of what's done at the national level and what's done at the local level, and that it is possible to get some of that working reasonably well.
For most of the lifetime poor, the zero tier of social assistance is going to be essential as one element to get their replacement rate. That hinges usually on the fiscal consolidation and fiscal flexibility. So fiscal reforms is going to be essential. You could have a central program of a basic amount which the states and localities can then piggyback and supplement according to their fiscal capacities for, let's say, everybody that is aged 70 and above. And then you are taking care of some aspects of the risk. I think the critical thing is not to now think about one scheme, but to look at all the tiers, all the different systems, and see where the changes are needed and over what time as a process you are going to reach a certain level of social safety nets.
I'm Sudipta Ghosh from LKY School. My question is to Professor Mukul. He mentioned about more sophisticated investment policies of the funds that provident funds or social security schemes collect. I would like him to elaborate more on it, especially in view of the debate between security of the investment and the more interest that could be collected on the investment. Thank you.
There can be no better expert on that than the person who is actually managing a large fund, who is in charge of Thai government pension fund. So I'll defer to Kuan. This is a debate that has been going on about security of the investments and the return. So it's the risk-return thing. Yep. And the general perception in many countries is that only if you have government securities that you are buying, fixed income, that is the only safe investment. Everything else is not. So maybe you could indicate how your asset allocation has changed over time and how the thinking has evolved in Thailand.
I think if we look back in the 10 years ago or 20 years ago, look at the pension, they're very conservative. And this is really a matter of the financial education of all the members and the investment board or investment committee. But between the risk and return, what we do in the pension system is we look at the long term. So what we look at it, number one is the risk. Security of we have to get the principal back. So by what way? So we have to divide it between the fixed income and securities and real estate, or even hedge fund. That's some proportion that we call asset allocation. Not to be risky, because once we have the risk framework, that how much risk can we take, can we absorb for the pension fund, like the government pension fund or other social security fund. And this is different. The pension fund have the more long-term objective than the social security fund. So let me address that in the perspective of the pension fund management. We look at the risk framework first. Return, as I mentioned to you earlier, that we look at the long-term return objective of 2 to 3% over inflation, and this is something that we have to put, and then put that, and then strictly follow that. We would not be greedy, too much greedy in terms of going for the equity for higher return, whereby volatility is more than fixed income. I like to mention something about the investment in equity in Asia and investment in equity in Europe or in America. This is totally different, because when we look at why we diversify out of the country to invest in the global market, that's because of the volatility of the market is much less than that. For example, in Thailand, if you look at the equity side, volatility or standard deviation of the investment in the stock market would be about 30%, up and down 30%. So this is called high volatility, and whereby if you look at the market, like the bigger market in Europe or in America, the volatility is only 15%. So given the same kind of rate of return of 12 to 15% in investing in equity in long term, you get somewhere around 12 to 15% over 10 years average. And then that's why you go and invest in the place that you get the less volatility. And then you wait between the volatility of the fixed income market, fixed income investment and equity investment, and also real estate is somewhere between. So the way we define asset allocation, design asset allocation, we get the risk framework first, that how much that we can accept the risk, and then we go for the return for the second issue.
What is the asset allocation of your fund? Domestic, international, fixed, and equity?
But this is the evolution of the pension fund management. 5 years ago, we invest 100% in Thailand, in the domestic market. And then starting from 2 years back, we invest about 15% in overseas market right now. That's the same reason I mentioned that we want to diversify out of the local market. Because when we manage the pension fund, we think of the fiduciary of the investment management more than just try to support the capital market. So this is the concept that we trying to do, and we divide in fixed income and equity. Like the fixed income domestic about 60%, overseas fixed income is about 5%. So domestic fixed income 60, overseas fixed income 5%. Domestic equity is about 12%. Overseas equity is about 9 to 10%, and the rest would be real estate and alternative investment.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, so I want to thank our three panelists very much, and thank all of you for coming.
It's now time for our tea break on the level below, and at 4:15, the external participants can take the bus back to their hotels. We'll meet at where we had lunch. Thanks.